I wish I could shout this from the rooftops. I guess I am on your podcast. I'm the kind of prophet in the wilderness trying to raise a warning cry that if we want to spread the ideas of liberty, we have to reach and engage families. All of the movement's organizations, not all, but the overwhelming majority of them focus on adults. And it is very difficult to change an adult's mind. It costs a lot of time and a lot of money, and it's very difficult to do. Imagine if we took a third of the philanthropy and the energy and the activity in our movement and reallocated it towards families and youth and the rising generation. We would transform culture. We would transform political systems. It would be a different world. So part of what I do is not just the actual work of the Tuttle Twins and the kids market and directly doing it. I also try and evangelize within our movement to get more organizations thinking about how do we engage families? How do we create value for them? If we're going to save the country, I think it's at the family dinner table. It's reinforcing and rebuilding social fabric. And that's what our projects are designed to do, is to create that material, beneficial impact for families to realize that these ideas are not philosophical pontifications. They are real world, practical impact that they can have on their lives.
Hello and welcome back to the Hannah Frankman podcast. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Connor Boyack. Connor was the very first guest that I ever had on the podcast. I was super excited to have him back. On today's episode, we talk about some big news of Connor's, namely that he acquired the company that I used to work for, Praxis. And so in today's episode, we go deep into that acquisition. We talk about why it made sense for Connor to take up the mantle of Praxis. We talk about the future of Praxis and the things that he has planned. We talk about why the market is so different now for alternatives to college than it was a decade ago when Praxis started. And we also go down all kinds of other topics and tangents per usual. This was a super fun episode to record, and I hope you enjoy listening. Also, if you're listening to today's episode on YouTube, please like and subscribe to the show. If you are listening on Spotify or on Apple, please take a moment to leave a 5-star review. Your help is very much appreciated in growing the channel. Okay, let's dig in. Connor Boyack, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be back with you.
Well, I owe you a thank you first because you were my very first podcast guest. For anyone who hasn't watched all of the episodes of the show, which most people haven't, you were guest number 1, and you were in Austin for, I think, a whole stack of meetings, if I remember correctly. And you made time to come out to the studio for a couple hours and record back when I was still learning all of the format of the show, and it was an experiment. So I'm very grateful to you for being one of the people who helped make the show real. So thank you for that. And I'm very excited to have you back.
I'm happy to be your guinea pig. So I'm glad you've worked out the kinks. And now number 2 interview is going to be bigger, brighter, and awesome. I'm excited to talk about the topic du jour.
Well, last time we were talking broad theory. This time we have news to dig into. You just bought a company. We need to talk about this.
Yeah, which is, and to clarify, not me individually, the organization I run, Libertas Network, we bought a company that you are, of course, very well familiar with. That's Praxis. It's kind of fun in a lot of ways because you don't really get mergers and acquisitions in the nonprofit space that much. It's typically like a for-profit thing, but it's legally and totally possible in the nonprofit world. We just don't see in the nonprofit world, I think, a lot of entrepreneurship, innovation, and market, focused activity. You get a lot of mediocrity and lethargy. So Praxis is exciting on its face, but then also simply acquiring a company as a nonprofit, it was a very fun experience, and it's already got me thinking, who else could we acquire and bring under our umbrella? So it's been a fun ride.
I'm so excited about this development, and I'm so excited to talk about all of the specifics of your vision for Praxis and how you want to build. But I want to talk first about why an acquisition of a college alternative startup apprenticeship company made sense in the broader vision that you have for Libertas, because I don't think, for anyone who's familiar with what Libertas does, it wouldn't necessarily be the first prediction of what you would do next is go acquire a startup apprenticeship program. So I want to hear a little bit about the vision of how it fits into what you're doing with Libertas and what you see in the relationship between these two projects.
So, for the uninitiated, which is probably many of your listeners, Libertas Network is, think of it like an umbrella company or a holding company of a bunch of family-facing initiatives designed to help teach and engage these families in the ideas of freedom. Of course, we're really well known for Tuttle Twins, which has sold over 6 million books, and now it's a cartoon with Angel Studios and so forth. And so that's reached a lot of people. We also have our Children's Entrepreneur Market project, where we help kids launch their own small business. That's aggressively scaling, and this year will be operational in every state and will help over 100,000 kids launch their own business. And that's going to scale up to about 500,000 kids every single year. And so we have projects like this that are empowering families not only with ideas, but actually getting them involved and engaged and helping them see like the real world utility of these ideas, that it's not just academic pontificating and theorizing. It's like, no, this actually makes the world a better place. Let us help you see how. So last October, we had a leadership retreat at our family's cabin, and we were discussing all kinds of, vision-oriented, goal-setting stuff. And the conversation shifted a little bit towards how can we better serve our audience as they age up? These kids are getting older. Last year we launched the Tuttle Twins Academy, which is like a series of video-based animated lectures on topics like entrepreneurship, civics, finance, economics and history and all kinds of stuff, but with animated, interesting videos. So we did that because we're like, hey, we need more stuff for teenagers. But then, of course, the teenagers keep getting older. So what do we do with them? So that's where the conversation went. And I said, you know what? Let me reach out to my friends at Praxis and let's just strike up a conversation and see where it goes. Maybe we can partner together. Maybe we can do a joint venture something. Maybe we do an acquisition. There was no like specific intent. It was just to say, hey, let me get up to speed with what Praxis has been doing in the past few years, and let's talk about, how it might sync up. So I reached out to Mitchell, who's the CEO, and the conversation progressed very quickly from there. It became readily apparent that they were primed to kind of look for a new home for Praxis and find someone who could invest the resources in it that it needed to grow. They wanted someone who was values aligned. Of course, Isaac Morehouse contributed a chapter to my Skip College book like 5-6 years ago. We dedicated the proceeds of that book to Praxis. So we've been in Praxis's orbit for a while. We've done a few marketing things over the years. So this wasn't a new relationship. It was just that I wasn't acutely aware of like the specifics of what they were doing in recent years, if they had made any programming changes. So within 30 days, between having that idea at our leadership retreat, 30 days later, we had a signed term sheet for the offer that they had accepted. And then it took a few weeks to work on the final acquisition, which is now closed. So we purchased 100% of it. And it was all out of this idea of, what can we do to better serve these young people? And certainly helping them avoid college debt and indoctrination, right? Getting off the college conveyor belt, just like we help K through 12 students explore homeschooling and microschooling and other alternatives to get off of that conveyor belt. It was very consistent with our approach to education that we support alternative models. We want to reduce barriers to entry. And we think that these old antiquated systems need to be refreshed or circumvented. And Praxis, we felt like, was a great way to do that. Here, look at their track record. Hundreds of young people successfully getting well-paying jobs and starting their lives without going through, spending all the money on a college degree that they ultimately didn't need. So it was one of those things where, we kind of look at one another like, actually, this is a really good fit and there's no need to delay this. So let's do it quickly. And we did.
That's amazing. So as Praxis launches as part of your network, how do you envision it actually integrating with the other programs and offerings that you have? Like, do you see a very clear pipeline for the average Tuttle Twins reader who then goes into Tuttle Twins Academy, who then goes into Praxis? Like, how do you envision all of these things feeding into each other?
Well, right now, for the past few years, Praxis, like any company, has been advertising. paying companies, doing online ads, trying to say, hey, come sign up for our service. And so there's a cost of acquisition involved in that. You're having to pay a bunch of money to try and attract people. I don't think that Praxis will ever not advertise to the broader public, but I do think that we can drive the cost of acquisition to near zero in two ways. The first is what you're describing with the pipeline. All these kids reading Tuttle Twins books and attending our markets and engaging with all of our other brands, as they get older, we are going to advertise Praxis to them. And so we'll segment our audience and say, let's communicate just with the families that have 17 to 19-year-olds. And let's put them in an email nurturing sequence where we can start to give them a little drip campaign and help them understand what Praxis is, what these opportunities are. And so everyone with kids at that age cohort will go through that program to get that exposure. We think that as we grow the kids market program and as Tuttle Twins continues to grow, that creates a huge audience for this pipeline of, not every, person is going to go into Praxis, but percentage-wise, we think there's going to be such a steady stream. And those are all free customers. They're already in our owned audience, and we don't need to pay for them. So that's the first way that we think the cost of acquisition will go to near zero. The second way is with an energized alumni community. So one of the things that we're very much going to be focusing on investing is creating a lot of value for the alumni. We think that the alumni have the potential to be Praxis's biggest ambassadors, and especially with a revitalized Praxis that has a lot of resources to actually grow and build this stuff out. We think that's going to energize and excite the alumni so that when they're talking to their nieces and nephews or their, coworker's kid or whatever, they're going to have Praxis top of mind, and they're going to be eager to say, I wholeheartedly endorse Praxis because what they're doing right now, matches the original vision, and we're so excited. And so obviously word of mouth is going to be huge and free and ultimately drive the cost of acquisition to zero. All of that means that as Praxis generates revenue, we can invest more of that revenue into program development, into alumni engagement, into marketing to entirely new people to bring them into our audience. So we think it fits really well in our ecosystem. And I anticipate that we're going to either be building or acquiring other projects that serve this kind of teen or young adult audience, so that we just have even more to offer. And, we don't want to be like, here's a kid's book, see you later, and never talk to them again. We always want to say, what's the next step? What's the next step? How can we help you even more? These people know us, they like us, they trust us, they want more from us. And so pulling these projects under our umbrella, like we have with Praxis, allows us to then go recommend, oh, here's the next thing, and here's the next thing. And the fact that it's coming from us carries a lot of swat with these families and makes them more likely to consider it than if they just, got a mailer or got an online ad. It's coming from someone that they know, like, and trust. And so we think the conversion rate's going to increase, the cost of acquisition is going to plummet, which from a business perspective makes me really excited because that means we can position Praxis for growth more quickly.
One of the things that you've done amazingly well with all of the projects that you've built to date is building a huge and very loyal audience. The amount of people who not only read and love and buy for their friends and family Tuttle Twins books, but who are on your email list, who are meaningfully, consistently engaging with you. It's really impressive. I'm really curious what you think the biggest drivers are that have led to you building such a big audience for Tuttle Twins and also now for the entrepreneurship market, because your numbers there are really impressive too, and they're scaling very fast.
It took me a while to clue in to this. I'll give you this example. When we started the Tuttle Twins in 2014, so over a decade ago is when we published our first book, we thought and we said that we were publishing children's books. And that's how we presented it. That's how we marketed it. And obviously it's true. It's not inaccurate. But it took us a few years to realize that we're not publishing children's books. We are publishing educational resources for the whole family, because mom and dad are learning alongside their children. When we've surveyed our audience in the past, I think it was like 56% of the parents who, mind you, bought the books for their kids thinking, I'm going to, my kids will learn. 56% of them are saying, I'm learning new things for the first time as well. And the reason is obvious. If I go to stop, Bob on the side of the road and I say, hey, Bob, here's this book. Maybe it's Economics in One Lesson or The Road to Serfdom, or, pick your classic book. And if I say, Bob, you should read this, his defenses come, oh, I'm too busy. No, I don't need it. My life's fine. Are you saying I'm stupid that I, don't know this stuff already? So there's a barrier, resistance. By contrast, if I go to Bob and I say, hey, Bob, you have kids. Yeah, I've got a, 13-year-old, 10-year-old, and a 7-year-old. Great. Hey, do you think it's important for them to learn about how the world works and how to be successful in life and these kind of principles and ideas that lead to human flourishing? I think Bob, being a good parent, says yes 100% of the time. And I say, hey, Bob, here's a book that will help you. Super simple. Go read it with your kids at bedtime, right? The likelihood that Bob does that is very high. So his defenses come down. I'm not making it about him. I'm not telling him he's dumb. I'm sneakily going through him to his kids and thereby reaching Bob and his wife as well. So we see again and again and again how our programs, Tuttle Twins, Kids Markets, other stuff, how we're engaging the parents alongside the kids. And that means much higher retention, right? Because if we go into the classroom and we do this like teach the teachers thing that a lot of organizations do. Let's bring together, 100 teachers and we'll teach them about why free markets are great with the hope and the idea that they go to their classrooms and they pass on the word. And I'm sure some of them do and it works fine. But then the kid sitting in that class goes home at the end of the day and mom says, hey, sweetie, what did you learn today? I don't know. And there's no retention because mom doesn't know what the kid learned in class. They're not on the same wavelength. By contrast, I could talk your ear off for hours with stories of parents sharing how the Tuttle Twins ideas and lessons or the kids market experience led to later amazing, deep conversations with their children when they're in the grocery store or they hear something on the radio or they're at a city council debate and suddenly that idea that they learned about comes alive. But mom or dad, having read the book or participating in the market with their child, they're on the same wavelength. And so they're able to deepen their shared understanding of these ideas, which means that the ideas are retained even more. But it also makes the parents acutely aware of the value we have created for their family because they've seen these light bulb moments for their children. And they realize that without our resources, that wouldn't have happened, which makes them grateful to us, which again increases the likelihood that when I come back to them with an additional recommendation, say Praxis, they're going to seriously consider it because they already see the value we've created for their family in the past.
You've definitely built basically a cult following around Tuttle Twins. I feel like every libertarian parent I meet references it at some point or has it sitting on their shelves. It feels almost like you don't have to do any marketing anymore. Like your audience is doing it for you. I'm curious about the early stages, though, of building the audience because now it feels like the word of mouth effect is very, very strong. But what were some of the early things that you did that helped build some of this momentum around the books and the brand?
Well, we launched the Tuttle Twins with our first book, The Tuttle Twins Learn About the Law, in 2014. And our children's books, the format that they take is they all are inspired by an original classic work. For example, Economics in One Lesson, The Road to Serfdom, that I mentioned. But the first one was based off of The Law by Frederick Bastiat, which was a very influential booklet/essay for both myself and my partner illustrator, Elijah. And so we did the book and we thought, who loves the law? It's all these libertarians that we hang out with every year at Freedom Fest or whatever, right? So we do a booth at Freedom Fest in 2014. No one knows who I am. No one knows who Tuttle Twins is. We're in the armpit of the convention hall in the dark corner off to the side, having paid like the bare minimum to get a booth.
People are walking a lot, for the record.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're still investing a bit. So people are walking by us, and we're having to, hey, do you have kids? Do you have grandkids? And the thing we ran into in the early days was there wasn't really a well-established need for what we were doing. Most people, even in our movement, were like, let kids be kids. Don't talk to them about these ideas until they're 18 and they're ready to vote. There wasn't like if you ever watch Shark Tank, which I religiously watch, the investments that the sharks always resist are the ones where the business owner is also a category creator, where they have to educate the consumer about why this product is even needed and then try and close the sale. And that's what Tuttle Twins was. No one was doing this when we started. Now you've got, what are they? The Brave Books and PragerU and some of these other groups are doing kids books. But we would even get resistance from our own tribe. Oh, let kids be kids. And of course, now with the left and the crazies all doing like, gender bender stuff for 3-year-olds and all the rest, the toothpaste is out of the tube, and everyone's like, yeah, we need to talk to our kids about this stuff. And so we were able to overcome that. So it's 2014. I'm at Freedom Fest. Elijah's off at a panel discussion or whatever. I'm sitting behind the booth by myself. We had just set up the website like 2 weeks prior. And so I'm getting an order notification on my phone every, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes with someone buying a book. Well, I'm behind the booth. I get this notification. I scroll up to see, who ordered, because mostly it's like friends and family and people I know who initially started buying the books. So I'm kind of monitoring who's buying the books. I scroll down and it says someone ordered 50 copies of the book. And I'm like, what? Who is this person? I scroll down. It's Ron Paul and his wife, Carol, buying one for all the grandkids. And I was like, yes, like the granddaddy of the Liberty Movement has blessed our project. We're on to something. And so we were focused in the early days on libertarians. We quickly realized that is a very limited audience. We started broadening to homeschool audiences and then conservative audiences. It's so funny to me. I've literally got a book that is Murray Rothbard's Anatomy of the State for kids, or Atlas Shrugged for kids. And we're taking these like hardcore ANCAP type libertarian ideas, but packaging them in a way where, like, when we did the book, we're like, oh, are parents going to freak out when we're talking about how the state is an inherent evil and we need to have, persuasion and voluntary relationships instead of coercion? And not only did we get zero resistance, we got gratitude. We got, wow, this is so interesting. Thanks. My kids and I are learning so much. And so even broadening our audience to conservatives generally, or just people who value freedom, we have found an impressive way to bring those people along towards our ideas, not beating them over the head with libertarian academic terminology and purity tests and, thick books from dead economists. No, we're serving their family. We're providing them real world applicable ideas to benefit their lives in a material way. We're providing them reading materials and experiences where they can bond as a family. And this, to me, Hannah, like, I wish I could shout this from the rooftops. I guess I am on our podcast. I'm the kind of prophet in the wilderness, trying to like raise a warning cry that if we want to spread the ideas of liberty, we have to reach and engage families. All of the movement's organizations, not all, but the overwhelming majority of them, focus on adults. And it is very difficult to change an adult's mind. It costs a lot of time and a lot of money, and it's very difficult to do. Imagine if we took a third of the philanthropy and the energy and the activity in our movement and reallocated it towards families and youth and the rising generation. We would transform culture. We would transform political systems. It would be a different world. So part of what I do is not just the actual work of the Tuttle Twins and the kids market and directly doing it. I also try and evangelize within our movement to get more organizations thinking about how do we engage families? How do we create value for them at the dinner table? I think that is where we save America, not at the Capitol, not in the courtroom, even though we should engage there, and we do with our policy think tank, Libertas Institute. But I don't think that's where we save the country. If we're going to save the country, I think it's at the family dinner table. It's reinforcing and rebuilding social fabric. And that's what our projects are designed to do, is to create that material, beneficial impact for families to realize that these ideas are not philosophical pontifications. They are real world, practical impact that they can have on their lives.
I couldn't agree more with the importance of family over everything else, which is a huge part of why I do the work I do. And it's a huge thing I look for and get excited about in the different projects that various entrepreneurs are building in the education space, is that recognition that if you want to criticize the culture, which is a very fair thing to do, so much of it gets built between the ages of 1 and 18. And so much of it happens by accident because families aren't being deliberate about what sort of culture they want their kids to be in and what sort of cultural references they want their kids to have. They just let the culture at large raise their children. And we end up with this very homogenized and not very intentional, to put it politely, culture that so many of us go out into adulthood living and embodying and representing because we've never thought about anything else. And so I agree with the importance of that completely. I want to play devil's advocate for a second, though, because I'm curious. I imagine you get pushback about this, and I'm curious how you think about it and how you respond to it. People on the right are very, very critical of, it's basically a meme at this point, the kids' books that the left are putting out that are sort of propagandizing kids.
Yep.
And they dislike the content that's in those books. They object to it, but they also object to the phenomenon of propagandizing children.
Yep.
So it's sort of you can dissect it both ways. Um, and both are fair critiques. Like, they don't like the content that's kids are being exposed to, but they also don't like the fact that kids are being sort of used in this way, or their young impressionable minds are being exposed to things that they don't appreciate. Um, but you can make the argument on both sides that a book that is more conservative leaning, that is also exposing kids to ideas that you think are important, people on the left can also criticize as being propaganda. And I'm curious if you get pushback about this, and if you do, how you think about it or respond to it.
The answer is yes. And how we respond to it is actually something you said just a moment ago before your question about intentional culture. Now, what I mean by that, and why I think you clued onto something there, is that in the early years, when people would accuse us of creating children's propaganda or trying to indoctrinate kids, I would resist that. I would defend myself and the Tuttle Twins against it. No. Propaganda is when, the teacher is shutting the classroom door and with a captive audience, pushing their agenda on these impressionable kids without the parents knowing. But at Tuttle Twins, our parents are buying the books for their kids. We're not doing anything sneaky or shady. And that's how I would try and kind of work around it. I don't know when, probably when COVID was starting and things started to shift in my mind, I no longer defend what we're doing against the claim. I embrace it wholeheartedly. Absolutely, we are creating propaganda, because what is propaganda? It is the propagation of an idea. The problem is not in the propagation of an idea. It's in the merit and the wisdom of the idea itself. There's good ideas, there's bad ideas, and you're deluding yourself if you think that your children are not having ideas propagated into their conscious and subconscious on a daily basis, right? And so for me, it's about engaging in the battle of ideas, which we do with adults. But for some reason, our movement has long shied away from doing this with kids. You look at the left and they've captured the institutions of education, which allows them to spread their ideas much more successfully. But our side has always kind of had this resistance that you're pointing out. And I think that's to our detriment, because we say, no, we don't talk to kids. Meanwhile, the kids are being talked to by people whose ideas we detest, even if it's covert and minimal through, movies and media, cartoons, and not like actual books with like, over the top ideas that are on the nose being pushed. It's in the culture, it's in the schools, it's in all of this content that our kids are being exposed to, or it's in the culture itself where peers are pushing this on, our kids in the school environment or in the neighborhood. And so for me, it's all about intentional culture. We need to recognize that ideas are propagating to our children. Same thing with indoctrination. I would defend myself against that term. Now I embrace it. I want to teach the doctrine to my kids. The question is, what doctrine are they learning? I take them to Sunday school. I impart to them, the religious beliefs that our family has, right? Why do I, who believe in economic truths and political truths and social and cultural truths, why would I not impart to my children what I believe to be true in all these other facets of life? Most people who are religious conservatives don't bat an eye about introducing and indoctrinating their children, teaching them the doctrine of Christ or whatever religion you have. But they get all like squirrely when they think about political doctrine or economic doctrines and truths. And so for me, it's intentional. It's we have to recognize this is happening anyways. Our children are being exposed to all kinds of ideas. You are derelict as a parent, I think, if you are not providing your children, like think of it this way. If your child was going to go to war in the Middle East, in some, new war that we do over there, if the army sent your 19-year-old into a battle zone, a conflict zone, without any armor, without weaponry, without the knowledge of the enemy, the rules of it, like, you'd be beside yourself. You'd be apoplectic. Like, how in the world would you send my child into physical combat without the requisite, protections and weaponry to like survive, let alone succeed? And yet I contend that parents send their children into the psychological battlefields of the day, cultural battlefields, I think spiritual battlefields as well, without providing them armor, without providing them weaponry, without helping them understand, have a knowledge of the enemy and the rules of engagement. And so what you said, I just want to add an exclamation point to it. It has to be intentional development of family culture, of societal culture. We need to recognize that on autopilot, all of our society's institutions veer left. We have to engage, we have to push back, we have to propagate our ideas, we have to compete for the hearts and minds of the rising generation, which gets back to our discussion a moment ago. If we're not doing that as a movement, if we're not reaching and teaching the rising generation, we are forever playing defense, because we're letting our ideological adversaries basically indoctrinate kids for 20 years, and only them do we approach them with our ideas on a college campus or, an online video. I'm sick of playing defense. I'm an impatient person. God put me on this earth with limited time. I want to make a dent in the universe, to quote Steve Jobs. And that means we have to go on the offense. We have to move the needle and not just forever be playing defense and trying to clean up what our ideological adversaries have done. Sorry, I could be on this soapbox for a long time. I'm going to throw it back to you.
No, this is what I wanted, because I think it's an important question to ask, and I don't hear it getting dissected enough. And it sounds like your argument is it's not a moral transgression to propagandize to your children or to children at large. The moral question is in the ideas that are being propagandized, not the actual act of. It's sort of, I think there's a corollary to what you're saying, which is sort of like the idea of impartial journalism, which is so scammy to me, because the act of journalism by necessity is coming through the lens and perspective of the reporter, and it is impossible to be entirely impartial. And so just by choosing which facts you are including in your reporting and which facts you are omitting, you are already making decisions that are changing the nature of, or are adding color and perspective to the reporting that you're doing, even if you're trying to be entirely impartial. And I think there's a corollary in what you're saying where it's kind of impossible to be entirely impartial in talking to your own kids. But I'm curious why you think, because it sounds like you've had a lot of conversations about this, why do you think so many people on the left are so comfortable with propagandizing to their children and so many people on the right are so squeamish about it? Why do you think there is this moral sense that we shouldn't propagandize to our children if you think that sense is misguided?
I mean, that's a great question that to do it justice, I would want to take more time to think about. Shooting from the hip, I would say, I think historically the left has kind of owned the means of education, the means of production of education in our movement. And therefore, with its teacher training colleges and the PTA and the teachers unions and everything else, has long been familiarized and accustomized with the idea of pushing their ideas, even as you say, like a journalist, maybe subconsciously or not so overtly, but it seeps in. It can't help but seep in. Of course, now you see on libs of TikTok all these crazy examples of teachers who are very aggressively, playing the activist. But beyond that, you've got just it kind of seeps in, it propagates whether you know it or not. So I feel like it probably boils down in some respect to the fact that conservatives, like most teachers and most people in academia, all are left-leaning and support Democrats, and you have a much more professional willingness to engage there, whereas our side, so-called, doesn't. I mean, I'm sure there's more nuanced and other answers that just aren't coming to mind, but that's where my head first goes, is that I feel like our movement, think of protests. You look at the left, and when something is happening that they don't like, they will be in the streets and they will, be holding their signs and kicking up a ruckus. And when someone on the right, libertarian, conservative, whatever, you don't like something, you're posting on X while on a break at work, because you have a life and you have a family and you have community and church obligations and you're not, in the streets for hours on end because you have nothing else to do and your life is wrapped up in your social and political identity. Our identity is with our church and with my job and my family. And we're actually, and obviously I'm speaking in like huge generalities here that, with a broad brush, but that's where my head first goes. I'd be curious if you have any thoughts beyond that, because I'd want to take more time to think about it. I'm sure there's other reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is also something that I would like to think more. Maybe we have another conversation at some point about this once we've both had time to think about it, because I ask because I'm genuinely curious. Like, I don't have an answer. I do think, I mean, I have always balked instinctively against the idea of overt propaganda at the expense of thought. Propaganda that is just presented as truth without encouraging questioning of said ideas, especially towards children. And I feel like because so many people are susceptible to it and so many people sort of default towards people pleasing without being willing to ask questions because it hasn't been modeled for them, they haven't been exposed to it, they don't trust themselves to ask questions and reason for themselves and be like, it takes a very specific type of person to be willing to stand up in class and say, no, teacher, you are wrong. I disagree with you, even if I'm going to be ridiculed and ostracized and punished for saying so.
Right.
Some people are wired that way. Most aren't. It's sort of a survival instinct. And so I think if you are going to expose kids to ideas that are propaganda, I think to me, it feels very important that you are also encouraging the critical thought that led you to believe these ideas.
Totally.
Exposing your kids to multiple kinds of ideas through the lens of questioning. Like, this is what I think is true, and this is what our family thinks is true. But also, these are why some people say it's not true. And like, let's debate about it. Let's talk about it. And I think a lot of people, again, I'm going to generalize in a way that probably isn't fair, but I do think a lot of people on the more conservative side of things there's a sort of sanctity towards the strength and individuality of an individual that I think makes one feel a little more allergic to propagandizing. There's this sort of like, I thought my way to get here.
Yeah.
And I want you to think your way here too, because I respect your ability to do so, as opposed to a more emotional, empathetic, like, let me help you get here kind of come from. But I think I wish I had a better answer, because it's a very stark divide in my mind between two very different ways of thinking about not just ideas and culture and politics and propaganda, but also about interacting with kids.
Yeah.
But I think the more you respect the individuality of a kid, I think the more instinctive it becomes to not want to shove your ideas down their throat, because you want them to have the space to come to their own conclusions. But there's also sort of a dark underbelly of that where, like, you don't want your kids to hate you either for forcing ideas on them. And then later they grow up and they go, well, all my friends don't think this, so
Sure.
why did you do that to me, Mom?
Well, I think, Hannah, I think you're right to pair it with critical thinking. Otherwise, it is what we would typically classify as just strictly indoctrination or propaganda, right? I think most good parents are trying to say, like, I don't want my kid to just be a mini-me and a robot that regurgitates what they're told. I want my kid to, which is, I think, why a lot of people love our products, because they stimulate a lot of that thinking and discussion to kind of unpack that. But my mind goes to the Vadi Bakum quote, where he says that don't be surprised if you send your children to Caesar's schools and they return home as Romans, right? So this gets to the question of intentionality of, like, how are you helping your kids? Like, what cultural values are you imparting? What sources are they relying upon as a source of truth? What's the process of engagement and discussion to help them navigate that? What foundation of true principles and doctrine are you giving them? And I think that applies to a political context and an economic and a cultural and social context as well, not just the religious one that Vadi Bakken was talking about. But to me, like, and let me sum up this way. One of the very interesting things that I observed years into doing Tuttle Twins was that parents needed and wanted help. And they didn't know how to do what they wanted to do. They knew that they wanted their kids to understand these ideas and to love freedom and America and to be critical thinkers. And, like they have these aspirations, but they had their kids enrolled in a school or even using homeschool curricula that just was not rising to the occasion. That was not accomplishing the mission. And more often than not, these parents themselves were products of what I call the public school system. They themselves, graduated long ago with a very, I'll say, deficient curriculum. And so, and it's mostly the moms who are doing the homeschooling and the education stuff, right? So most of these moms have a deep insecurity when it comes to their own knowledge of these ideas and thus their ability to transmit the ideas and to respond to questions from their children, about those ideas. Today I say, well, just go ask Grok or Chat GPT and you'll have a little study buddy to help you out. But these parents were really struggling because they had high hopes and aspirations, low expectations and engagement, and they weren't really sure how to bridge the divide. And so fundamentally what our resources try and do is just to be that crutch. Just to say, like, you want to be a good mom, you want to be a good dad, you have these aspirations. Let us just give you some tools to engage in these ideas, to discuss them, to apply them in your, day-to-day lives of your family. Because I don't want this to just be an intellectual exercise. I don't want this to be a strict indoctrination of facts that the child can just regurgitate and, robotically repeat. No, I want these ideas to be tested and evaluated and discussed and debated. And how do we do that in a home environment where parents and children are talking about and engaged in the same issues and the same ideas? That's why our work is so optimized for the family dinner table, because I think that, again, is where you see the retention. It's where you see the application. It's where you see the change. So I like what you're saying. I do think the critical thinking aspect has to be there. Otherwise, we're just turning our kids into robots and lemmings, and that's not ultimately what we want, right?
No, if you teach your child to merely absorb the ideas that are being presented to them by an authority figure that they respect, when you cease to be the primary authority figure in their life, they will be susceptible to the ideas of any authority figure who they
Amen.
hold in high regard. And so you have to teach them the art of thinking and the practice and the willingness to ask questions and encourage them to ask you questions and make them feel like their questions are respected, even if they're, 5-year-old level questions. You're still making them feel like it is always okay, that their questions will be met well, and that those questions are an avenue for deeper understanding and greater knowledge. And I think that's deeply important no matter what ideas you're exposing your kid to. And I think it also alleviates some of the instinctive repulsion towards just propagandizing to your kids to inoculate them against other ideas that I think a lot of people rightfully feel because they want to respect the integrity and the development of their child. Like, I don't want to meddle too much. I don't want to try to force you to be something. I respect the miracle that is you and all of your unique and beautiful, like, all the things that make you what you are, and you're different from me and you're different from anyone else. And that's amazing. And I think parents really want to treat that as sacred. But if you're giving your kid the tools to cultivate their own thought process, you can kind of expose them to anything because you're teaching them how to discuss it and how to grapple with it and how to tie it to other ideas that they're also being exposed to, which kids are also capable of way earlier than people think they are. Really talk to a 3-year-old for a while and watch the way they're piecing together information. Their cognitive skills are way farther along than culture gives them credit for. But I do think that softens some of the instinctive aversion that people feel towards just propagandizing toward their kids. I think they're right in being concerned about just outright propaganda, but I also don't think that's what you're talking about. You're talking about exposure to ideas that they otherwise would not ever see, and therefore, like, your kid is not going to magically intuit about the world all of these different philosophical concepts and deep workings and things that it has taken incredibly smart people generations of work to figure out. They're not going to just intuit that. They have to be exposed to it for it to become part of their lexicon, but that's not the same as replacing their cognition with just like, here's the finished thought, just like take this and you don't have to think about it anymore.
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
Amen.
Okay, let's go back to Praxis. There were a couple of things that you said earlier that I thought were really, really interesting and really important. You were talking about the alumni community as being one of the sort of routes towards growth for Praxis. And I think, and we've talked about this before, but I think you're right on the money with that, because one of the things that Praxis has always done very, very well is collect a group of like-minded and similarly ambitious young people and deliver an experience that makes them forever identify as being a Praxian. It's been years since I worked for Praxis, and I still regularly talk to Praxis alumni who, being a Praxis alumni is still a core part of their identity, both socially because they're friends with a lot of Praxians, but also in terms of their like early career journey and the trajectory that they're on. So I think you're right on the money with that. And I think that's probably one of the most valuable things about Praxis, that will carry forward no matter how Praxis emerges and evolves. But I'm really curious. I want to talk a little bit about your vision for what is next for Praxis. Like, now that it's coming under the umbrella of Libertas, I know that you want to invest in the alumni. I know you want to invest in building the program and expanding it. What is the vision for the next, both like the next couple of years and also like the long-term vision of what you would like it to be?
So there's three main goals that will be our focus for the next 3 years. There's going to be some other little side projects and stuff that we spin up, but the three goals, I'd say the first one is we're going to reintroduce the job guarantee program that Praxis had in its past. We're going to streamline that and we're going to scale it. So for those who don't know, the idea here is that you enter Praxis, you go through the boot camp for a few months, do all the curriculum and all the exercises, and then you come out at the end with a job offer. And what's impressive to me about Praxis is that the delta of the financial decision is like $250,000. When you think of foregoing 4 years of tuition, right, saving tens of thousands of dollars there, and then having 4 years of earned income from a job, the difference between that number for your typical college student going for 4 years and incurring all that debt and missing out on those 4 years of earnings versus a Praxis participant, that's $250,000. That's insane. So we want to reintroduce the job guarantee program. We want to really streamline operations. So we're going to be introducing all kinds of processes and efficiencies just behind the scenes to make sure everything is super streamlined. And then once it is, we're going to scale it up. And I think total lifetime Praxis has done, I think it's like 900 students that have gone through Praxis. Our goal by next year is that maybe this is our 2027 goal. I'd have to go back and look. But very soon, we want to get to the point where we're doing 900 students every single year. We are in this to scale. We're not going to do this incrementally. I am not someone who likes 5% growth year over year. I want to triple. I want to, there's a fantastic book I highly recommend. I don't have it here near me. That every young professional, frankly, every professional read. It's by Ben Hardy and Dr. Dan Sullivan. It's called 10X is easier than 2X. And the idea is when you set these massive 10X goals, they feel impossible. And yet there's only a few ways that you can accomplish that. And so it really forces you to think creatively and differently about affecting massive change. Whereas if you just say, oh, we want to go from 100 students this year to 110, you don't have to change anything about your doing other than just doing a little more, and so it doesn't help you root out those efficiencies. It doesn't help you unlock transformational change. So that's our mentality here is we want 10X growth. We want to really put our pedal to the metal once we've got the program kind of stabilized and streamlined and work out some kinks. So that's, I'd say, goal number one. The second one is right now and historically, Praxis is focused on helping young adults get jobs without a college degree. So as I said, we're going to continue that. We're going to 10x that. But we're also going to build out an additional program alongside that for the young adults who don't want a W-2 9-to-5 type job, but want to start their own business. And so we're going to put them through a kind of slightly different boot camp, different education. And then what can we offer them? Well, we can take care of all their back office support. Hey, don't worry about your accounting and your legal and your whatever. We got you. Just go build. Just go, do what you want to do. So we can provide them back office support. We'll also turn the Praxis alumni community into an investment arm where Praxians can invest in one another's businesses. And we can almost have these pitch competitions where the up and coming Praxians going through the process, through the program, can solicit from their peers, the kind of friends and family around, to get them off the ground with the investment that we need. And then Praxis itself and Libertas Network will also directly invest in these businesses. And so we think that's a great way to create this flourishing ecosystem of entrepreneurs, but also, if it's like venture capital, like 9 out of 10 of your investments are going to fail, but you get that one that just blows up and then it covers all your losses and then has some extra funding. So we see it as a way for long-term growth of what we're doing, to be able to get in these companies at the ground floor and support these kids when they're not kids, but young adults when they're getting started. So that's number two, is kind of launching this entrepreneurship track. Probably won't do that until 2026. It'll take us a while to stabilize and focus on the job stuff, and then we'll start working on the entrepreneurship stuff. The third one, which will probably come more in year 3, is we want a top of funnel program for younger young adults and for teenagers. So the concept here for now, this is still in the concept phase, is think of the Boy Scout merit badge system meets professional development, right? So just like you're going after those little badges, it's like a gamified experience, right? Well, what if we had a badge for, drive for Uber, start an Etsy store, learn how to code with Copilot AI, start a Substack, start a YouTube channel, whatever it is, right? We could have all these different projects. Probably what we would do is attach them each to a partnering company. So it's like, hey, you're interested in AI development? Well, let's have you check out, what are they called? Not Lambda School anymore, but whatever Austin's calling it now. Yeah. So, hey, come check out our partner here, right? Or, hey, you started Substack? Well, we got a deal with Substack if you want to do this full-time professionally. So what we're looking to do with this, as I said, it's top of funnel, is we can take all the 17, 18, 19-year-olds and say, look, you may not be ready yet to know whether you want to get a job or what industry you want to get a job in or start your own business. So first, why don't you go through this 3 to 6 month little experiential thing, and in rapid fire time, you are going to get exposure to a lot of things. And you're going to quickly find out, ooh, I liked that. Ooh, I hate that. I don't want to do that. And so for these younger kids who are still trying to discover their interests and figure out what they want to spend the next decades of their life on, we just want to kind of give them that intense experience of exposure to a wide variety of things. So then the idea would be, great, you went through that, whatever we're going to call that program. Now we've got this next thing, which is the current Praxis job, programming, or the entrepreneurship stuff, or other stuff we may launch. But we want to make sure that these younger folks coming through our funnel have a very clear and intentional picture of what they want in life. If we get an 18-year-old that already knows exactly what they want, and then the Praxis Jobs program can help them with that, knock yourself out, go do that. But there's a ton of these younger kids who are just like, I don't know what I want to do. And I think it would be premature to enroll them in Praxis as it exists today when they lack clarity on what they want in life. So we want to fill the gap there with this kind of discovery project of just figuring out, who am I, what do I like, what don't I like, so that they then have more certainty as they continue on their path. So those are the three big goals for the next 3 years. Growth of the current program, the entrepreneurship program, and then this kind of discovery top of funnel program. And I'm super pumped. I'm really excited to just hit the ground running and get going.
I love the idea of the more formalized entrepreneurship arm, because Praxis has always attracted kids who have an entrepreneurial streak. Not exclusively, most of the kids who historically have done Praxis wanted the very sort of pure intention of the program, which is go get a job at a startup, start building your career. But if you're marketing towards kids who are opting out of a system, you're inherently going to attract some kids who have a real entrepreneurial streak. And it was always a very sort of customized experience for those kids to sort of piecemeal choose what parts of the program were beneficial to their goals, but then working to supplement all of the other things that they needed to go chase their entrepreneurial dreams. And that was always a type of kid that when I was working for Praxis, we were always excited to work with. But having a more formal set of offerings that are much more tailored in terms of the support and resources that are being offered is so exciting, because I think there's a huge subset of people who are closely aligned to what Praxis historically has been, especially ideologically and like from a value standpoint. They'd fit in perfectly with the community, but the offerings just aren't quite there to meet their deepest needs. But they're a huge value add to the community, including, they can hire other Praxians as they're building their companies.
Right.
So creating something formal there, I'm really excited about that, because I think there's a huge market for it, but it's also a huge value add to the more traditional version of the program, because there's such a symbiotic relationship between the kids who are trying to build their careers working for someone who's building a company, and then the people who want to build the companies. So I love that. What about, you said that your goal is to grow the student body very quickly. What are the core sort of action items to execute on that in the first year, especially? Like, do you have a large audience of college age kids already who were Tuttle Twins readers? Or, because you mentioned people are aging up, are you in the early stages of that, or is there a large subset of your audience that's there? Like, what are the biggest places that you anticipate people coming in from? And maybe as a secondary question to that, who do you think is a good fit too? Because there are a lot of people who listen to this who don't want to send their kids to college. And so this is very up the alley of a lot of people here too. So maybe also what kind of the profile is that you're looking for in a student that you would, or a participant rather, that you would want to bring into the program.
Well, I'll start with that last one first. I think historically Praxis was more discriminating than we are going to be moving forward. The Praxis would accept a far, I don't remember what it's like 13% of applicants.
It was very small.
Something like that. And so there's been kind of a gauntlet to get through. I think we're going to loosen that a little bit to broaden the pool of people getting in. We still want to be selective. It's not going to be anyone who applies gets in, but I think we're going to loosen that criteria just to lower the barrier to entry. And obviously we'll have some attrition. We'll have some kids that aren't cut out. We'll lose them along the way, but we want to get them in and start indoctrinating them and engaging them quickly, so that they can then figure out, is this right for me or not? And then we'll probably have the payments structured such that hey, look, if you drop within 90 days, you lose your deposit, but you don't owe us the rest of them. We'll have it structured in a way where that will be possible, rather than on the front end just saying, nope, sorry, you're not included. So I think we're going to loosen it a bit. As I said, I think over time, the cost of acquisition gets to near zero. However, in the early first 2 years, maybe 3, I anticipate we'll be very aggressively marketing online and trying to pull in entirely new people who aren't in our orbit. But yes, we when we're ready to, we're working on a new website and all the things over the next few months. When we're ready to kind of do a heavier public launch with the new job guarantee and all the things, we're going to do a big PR push. We're going to blast it out to our existing community, a subset of whom have teenagers. But look, most of them, even if they have younger kids, they've got older nieces and nephews, or their neighbor who's, a high school senior. So we will do our email list right now is 1 million people or something like that. And so we've got a large network, and our open rate is phenomenal. The industry average is usually 25 to 30% open rates on emails. Ours is 53%. And so people love our emails. They love me informing them and helping them kind of navigate the world. And so we'll do a big blast, a big push to say, hey, any teenager, young adult, you should send them to Praxis. So we'll do a big push. We just hired a new VP of communications for the Libertas Network, who will service all of our different properties. And he is pumped for Praxis because He wants to do a ton of media pitching to get earned media. There's headlines all the time about college debt or DEI this, or college admissions are declining, or this college shut down. And so every time there's like a college related discussion, we want to be pitching to media to kind of say, hey, we have something to say about that. And that's free as well to pull those all those leads in. So it'll be a cornucopia of different marketing strategies. For example, one of the things that I want to experiment very heavily with is webinars. I think the kind of Praxis model and the thinking behind this college alternative would make great for like a 90-minute webinar presentation where we walk through case studies, and mom is watching it alongside her 17-year-old kid, and then we can have a compelling offer at the end to get them to pay that deposit and rope them in. And so there's a lot of marketing stuff that we want to play with, and we will be investing. Libertas itself will probably be putting in at least $500,000 this year of just injecting capital into Praxis, building out the team, investing in marketing. So there's going to be a lot of early investment like that to kind of put Praxis on a really solid footing. And then as we scale, we'll hopefully be fully profitable within the first year, if not by year 2, after all of our early investments pay off.
This is really exciting. I think one of the special things about Praxis is that it's an experience that young people have at a very formative moment in their early adulthood. And so it leaves more of an impact than a lot of other things that they will do later on in their careers, even if those things last much longer and financially or logistically are much bigger things. There's something about that moment in time of stepping out into adulthood for the first time. You're finding your way. You're maybe finding your tribe for the first time. You're meeting other people who actually think like you. Yeah, or your spouse, which has happened to a number of Praxians, either meeting their spouses their spouse, another participant became their spouse, or they ended up with the sibling or the friend of someone that they met in Praxis. It really leaves a very strong mark and a very positive mark. And Praxis has historically attracted a lot of really exceptional young people, many of whom, because I worked for Praxis for years, so I had the privilege of working with a lot of them. And to this day, I keep up with a lot of them. And many of them are best friends with a handful of other Praxians that they met going through the program. And the sort of Praxis ethos is still a very big part of their identity, even, 5-10 years removed from going through the program. It's really cool to see.
Totally.
And so I'm so excited to see Praxis get this shot of revitalization and this new vision, because I think I've always thought, I put years of my life into working for Praxis, in part because it was such a valuable thing for me as I was launching my career, but also because I really, really believed in the vision and the mission. And so I'm really excited about what you're doing. I'm also curious, you mentioned earlier, you were talking about sort of breaking into the market with Tuttle Twins, and you talked about category creation. And that struck a chord, because when I was working full-time for Praxis, we were all as a team obsessively studying the idea of category creation. We were reading Christopher Lochhead's books about it, because that's kind of what we were doing. Like, a college alternative program was a new idea. It didn't really exist yet, and people weren't really talking on the main stage yet about bypassing college. And if they were, it was a very fringe idea. And that the world has changed a lot in the past decade. And I'm curious what your read on this is now. Like, I almost think Praxis, when it launched, was a little too early. Like, it didn't quite catch the wave. It's helped build the wave, but it was too early to just ride the momentum of people starting to say, wait, the college bubble's about to burst. Maybe we shouldn't be sending our kids here after all. I'm curious what you're seeing now in the landscape. Like, do you think people are more ready for this than they were a decade ago? Do you think there's more market demand? Do you think they're ready to accept that maybe college isn't all that it was cracked up to be or was for future generations? Like, what are you seeing?
So I think there's two major influences that have caused a massive shift in the past 5 years. And I agree with you. Praxis was kind of ahead of its time in that regard, and having to work on category creation, which is always tough. The first one is COVID. COVID changed so many people's perceptions of education. Look at K through 12 school choice. Like, the polling numbers across the country increased by like 12, 13% in the course of like a year in terms of parents supporting school choice. Why? Because they were seeing how inefficient and ineffective the traditional system was for their kid. Their kid's at home and in an hour and a half can accomplish all the work and all the stuff that they needed to go over that they were spending 6 to 8 hours at school doing. So parents increasingly were like, wait a minute, like, we don't need this. And also, my kid comes home depressed or bullied or disrespectful because they're kind of getting all this culture and toxicity or whatever. So that shifted a lot of parents' minds. I think the same has happened since COVID with college. You've seen just a broader shift of questioning what is education. And with remote work and everything else tied into that, there's just been a reevaluation in a lot of people's minds of what we all accepted to be true for generations, which was, you got to go to college and then get a degree and then get a good 9-to-5 job to sit in a cubicle for the next 2 years. We've just seen more people openly questioning that. And I think a lot of that is attributed to COVID. The second influence, I would say, is AI. I think AI is massively disrupting K through 12, but also college education as well. And the fact that you now have not just the information of the world at your fingertips, but like in ways that you never could before, I think that's also caused a lot of people to reevaluate, well, wait a minute, instead, could I just learn these tools and ask this, Chat GPT, whatever I want, whenever I want, get the information I need, and then go about my day, building this thing or working on this job. So I think those are two major influences. I on my X account for years have always, whenever I see something college related, I'll quote tweet it and I'll just say, skip college. And I do that, I don't know, a few times a week. And the engagement I get on those and the people sharing that, I think is like, this is super anecdotal and just, personal. But like, the message I feel like is catching on. Even the skip college book that we did like 5 years ago or whenever that was, even that was still kind of like, oh, skip college? Are you really suggesting that people, like, even that was still pre-COVID? But I think a lot has changed in the last 5 years. So I think timing is great. Timing with the acquisition was great for the Praxis team. They were ready to kind of, let someone new adopt the Praxis baby. Of course, calling Isaac was one of my first things because he fathered this child and I wanted to get his blessing, and he's totally enthusiastic. But the Praxis team was ready. It was good timing. Our team was ready and it was good timing. The stars seem like they're aligning in a lot of ways. That's not to say it won't be hard. There's a ton of work to do, especially to achieve the growth that we want. So we're going to be building a team, existing team, but a bunch of new people, and really trying to inject all the resources that we need to really put it on a good footing. Because I see a lot of potential for it. And, I think Praxis historically has been operated like a lean and mean skeleton crew, right? And they never raised any money to go out to any like venture capital or anything like that. So they were always just kind of like, hunting what they eat, or whatever that term is, right? And so our hope is that we bring a team that's well-resourced, well-networked, and has a lot of track record, and we can give them that early support they need to just get on a good footing and then grow. Like I said, I think there's a ton of potential, and I'm pumped.
All right, if people are listening to this and they're going, this sounds amazing, and this is maybe a great fit for my teenager or my young adult, where would you send them next?
So website is discoverpraxis.com. As I said, we're working on a new website and we're going to refine some of the marketing and all of that. But you don't need to worry or wait. I would say start now, sign up, start talking to our team, learning about what the program is. We're going to be modifying the program, but we're going to be doing that for years. We're going to be tweaking and experimenting. And so nothing is static. Don't feel like, oh, I should hold off for 3 months and give them some time. I would actually get in early and get in on the ground floor before we start, tinkering a lot. So discoverpraxis.com. You asked earlier, who is this not for? Obviously, like, as you said, you do get kind of this libertarian-ish, alternative-minded, independent thinker who is like the key avatar historically for Praxis. I do think we're going to broaden that a bit, and so we'll see a wider spectrum of, ideological or cultural whatever. But I also don't know, right? We could stay in our lane with what Praxis has historically done and just blow that up. A lot of what we'll be doing is experimenting. We aren't going to have an ideological purity test or anything like that to join. Ultimately, we're looking for builders. We want to find the ambitious young adults who don't want to be on a conveyor belt, who don't want to, have to kiss the ring and go through the motions. I want impatient people like me who recognize I've got limited time on this earth. I don't want to jump through hoops and follow your rules if they're not actually necessary. Let me just do what's actually necessary to then go live a life of human flourishing and have an impact. I'm looking for who are those up and comers, who are those people that are just ambitious and eager to get started. If that's you listening, your kid, your grandkid, your nephew, your niece, send them to Praxis. They're going to be part of an amazing community, Hannah among them, and we're going to be blowing it up with a lot more fun stuff to come.
Amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This is so fun. I'm so excited to see where Praxis is and what you're building in the next 6-12 months. But thanks so much for taking all the time to share this. I'm selfishly have really enjoyed all of the updates. This has been really fun.
Thanks for having me, Hannah, and for sharing with your audience. Like I said, we're eager to grow and spread the word. So for all the listeners, please share Praxis with the people in your life, and let's do some good.
Amazing. Thanks, Connor. All right, my friends, that is a wrap for today. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope that you found this valuable. Please leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. Please like the video on YouTube. And please don't forget to subscribe on whatever platform you listen to make sure that you don't miss next week's episode. Thank you so much, friends. I will see you next week.